Testing. Okay. My name is Brendan Thull. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming today. Because this is such a great opportunity for all of us to witness. Because Holocaust education is more important now than it has ever been. Tonight at sunset marks Yom HaShoah, a Remembrance Day all over the world for Jewish people and all the misfortune that they have been through. At this time in history, it is essential for each of us to look back at the tragic events and reflect on where we've come in history. Today could not be possible if it weren't for the overwhelming support and donations through the Peter Thull Fund. So many people were so generous enough to help out through the Peter Thull Fund today at Forsyth Tech, and we owe them a great thanks. Also, thank you for the Bagel Station for donating the breakfast for us. And one last thing. We all get the tremendous privilege of hearing Jack L. Grossman speak about his book, Child of the Forest, that we have all enjoyed reading. Jack's fundraiser efforts have raised over $18 million in cash and in kind for numerous nonprofit organizations. Jack was the recipient of the Mooresville South Iredell Chamber and Commerce Citizen of the Year Award in 2018, following Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s award in 2017. Jack is a founding member of Dove House Children's Advocacy Center and is now a Legacy Board member. Jack also built a Boys and Girls Club in Florida and won a Power Board Award from Boys and Girls National Club. Jack has served on over a dozen nonprofit boards and has received dozens of community service and humanitarian awards. He was awarded one of 3 humanitarian awards presented by an NYSE 1.5 billion company. Jack is the author of Child of the Forest, along with co-author James Buchanan, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, a true story about a young girl and her experiences following the Nazi invasion of her small town in eastern Poland. The book has garnered tremendous recognition and has won numerous awards internationally. Jack Grossman resides in Mooresville, North Carolina, and with his wife, Christy. They have 3 daughters. Jack also has a daughter and grandson from a previous marriage. I welcome Jack Grossman.
Thank you very much. I would like to first of all thank Jonathan Hall, Amber Suter, Forsyth Tech, and of course all of you out in the virtual audience. I appreciate you joining me today on tonight being the eve of Yom HaShoah. Just a little bit more about me. I do have an interesting background. I was born in Havana, Cuba, because my grandparents had fled Eastern Europe during a tough time for the Jews, actually before Hitler. In the 1920s, there was a lot of Jewish oppression. My grandfather came from Budapest, Hungary, my grandmother from Warsaw, Poland, and they settled in Havana, Cuba. My mother was born in Havana. My father was a U.S. citizen who was born in Brooklyn and was stationed at Guantanamo Bay, where he met my mother in Cuba, and hence I was born there. So I refer to my grandparents as double refugees. They fled the oppression of Jews in Eastern Europe in the 20s, and then they fled the communist regime of Castro in 1960. So they had a rough life, needless to say. My family moved here to North Carolina, to Mooresville, specifically in the year 2000, and I am Jewish. I grew up with anti-Semitism in every community that I have lived in. Sad to say, including Mooresville, North Carolina, in Florida and Indiana, and everywhere that I have lived, to the point where in Florida we had a little Holocaust remembrance statuary in the courtyard of the JCC that was destroyed with sledgehammers. We've had swastika graffiti on buildings. We've had literature strewn on the property when I was growing up in Indiana, so I have faced anti-Semitism my entire life. I had cousins that were in the Holocaust camps in Auschwitz. There's actually a picture that circulates, and it probably will in the next couple days, in social media of a great aunt, Leona, that I have, holding a small infant, and visible on her forearm is the Auschwitz tattoo, a very poignant photo, needless to say. In 2010, I suffered a near-death brainstem stroke that was the biggest challenge of my life. I'm happy to have survived it, and it has been, needless to say, an extreme challenge for me physically, emotionally, back then financially, and in every way possible. I had met Charlene in 2006 on a B'nai Mitzvah trip to the Washington, D.C. U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, sponsored by Temple Israel in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was one of the chaperones on the bus trip. There were 55 of us that took the trip. That was my third trip. I had gone with our youngest daughter's two older sisters in the several years prior to that. This time it was a little bit different. When we got off of the bus at the museum, we didn't immediately go on to the tour. We were kind of escorted into a banquet room where chairs were set up, and we all sat down, and a podium stood in the front, and a little bitty lady walked in, and barely taller than the podium, and started telling us her Holocaust experience. And I can only say that it was so riveting and so compelling that I could not get it out of my head. And it stuck with me through the entire tour of the museum, the bus ride home, 8 hours to Charlotte, the 1 hour back up to Mooresville. I just couldn't get it out of my head. So the first thing I did after greeting my family when I got home was to go on the computer and see if anybody had told Charlene's story, in the form of a book or a film, because I thought that her story really needed to be told to the entire world. And when I couldn't really find anything but a few articles and some videos and some stuff on the museum site, I looked up at my wife and said, honey, we're going to tell Charlene's story to the world, no matter what it takes. Well, the no matter what it takes has been many years of diligence and fortitude and perseverance, working through my stroke, which had to put everything on the back burner. Obviously, the recession of 2008, her passing in 2013, and even more recently, COVID really knocked the wind out of my sails there for a couple of years in terms of having had great momentum going into April. A couple of years ago, I had a full month scheduled of speaking engagements at synagogues, colleges, day schools, the Atlanta Country Club, just all kinds of events scheduled. And overnight, everything was canceled. So I had to kind of regroup at that point. The book has garnered hundreds of 5-star reviews. There are basically two types of readers I have found. The readers that read it cover to cover quickly in like one sitting. I've had friends that have read it on international flights in its entirety. And then there are readers that kind of have to take it in small doses because of the emotional and nature of the book and the story. So I've kind of found that to be true. The reviews are really, to me, extremely touching. I've had people say that they can't look food the same way again. They can't look at food the same way, and I can understand why. And people that were shaken to the core, and the story, which is a true story, is kind of a tough read, but it's a very necessary read. And I think it is as timely as ever today as it has been since I met Charlene. So I had gotten in touch with Charlene after I met her at the museum and called her on the phone and said, what do you think about a film or a book about your life story? And she was very open to it, very intrigued, very excited. So I took a trip up to Washington, D.C. She lived in Alexandria, Virginia. I met her and her husband, Ed, and met them at a restaurant. And we talked about it and immediately became dear friends and decided to move forward with the project. Um, just a little side story, I had noticed when we were talking, at the dinner table there, that I noticed the tip of her ring finger was missing. And I immediately thought to myself, I wonder if that had anything to do with her Holocaust experience, because obviously she couldn't tell us all of the stories at the museum in that, whatever that 45-minute time frame was. So as soon as I had thought that, she started telling me the story about how she lost the tip of her ring finger, which was just more evidence to me that this story had to be told. It was just incredible that she survived. And she used to ask me all the time, she did have survivor's guilt, why she lived. So many perished, why did she live? And I would tell her, so we can tell your story to the entire world, so you can tell your story to the entire world. And I made a promise at that time that I would do that and be the messenger in that process. So Charlene and Ed are both interned at Arlington National Cemetery. I think that is quite an honor. He was a retired brigadier general. I plan on visiting the gravesite the next time I'm in Washington, D.C. If you've read the book, you know that she referred to the little pits that she dug in the ground at night, or that she burrowed into, as her little grave. And that just struck me as something that, was so intense that a small child would do that and refer to those little hiding places that she would cover herself up with twigs and leaves and different things as her little grave. Charlene used to tell me also, and I think it's in some of her writings, that death was always one step behind her. And that is true. If you read the book, it is incredible how it goes from story to story, how she escapes death as if by a miracle, time after time after time. I know that a lot of different war veterans suffer from what they call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I looked it up just out of curiosity. The term really wasn't formulated until after the Vietnam War, but I can assure you that there was plenty of PTSD during the Holocaust and various different wars. But I could tell and knew that she had suffered from it by one of her little stories that she told me, how when she came over here to the States. So this is after her experience, after she witnessed all the horrific things that no human should ever have to see, let alone a child. She was here, she was safe. This was decades later, but yet if her husband was driving her down the road and there were trees along the lining the road there, she would look instinctively out the window to see if the brush was thick enough for her to hide in. That never left her. That speaks volumes to me that, the depth of this story and the effect that it had on Charlene. Yet when you met her, you would never know that she experienced these horrific acts, because she was so kind, so humble, so gentle-spirited. You would never know that she was a survivor of the Holocaust. So I was introduced to James Buchanan back in 2016, my co-author, and became a collaborative effort. We worked very hard together, a lot of research, obviously a lot of writing, took a couple years to write. The book was released in the late fall of 2018, so fairly recently. I learned a lot about the publishing industry. I self-published, so meaning that I didn't sell the project to a publisher. I just found that process a little bit difficult, and we had some offers, but it just seemed to be one-sided. So I thought, with my marketing background, that I would go ahead and do it. One of the best decisions I ever made. On the back of the book, you'll see there are some various quotes referring to the book and its contents. One of them from her son, Stephen, who is living and who is a doctor up in Rhode Island. And it was important to Stephen to put in a little quip that Charlene used to speak about at all of her, her speakings and events and engagements, whether it be civic events, universities, at the museum, whatever. And that was on eradicating the 4 evil eyes: ignorance, intolerance, indifference, and injustice. So we made sure that we got that in Stephen's quote, and he was very happy with that. Now I have been, and not on purpose, but by chance, I was invited to speak to a local middle school. And at first I thought, gosh, these kids are going to be too young. There's no way that 12, 13, 14-year-old children can read this book and handle the emotional story behind it. And then I was convinced by the teachers at the school and the librarian to go ahead and set that up. And boy, that started a whirlwind of middle school readings for me. And once again, all by word of mouth, all by teachers talking, students. What has amazed me the most is that I have had 0 blowback, not one negative comment from the students, the teachers, the librarians, the principals, the parents of the students. You would think that somewhere along the line, an anti-Semitic, parent would complain about their child having to listen to this story. There has been none of that. And I think part of the reason is this hits home. It's a different kind of Holocaust story. It's about a young girl, age 12 to 14, that survives in brutal winters in the forests of Eastern Poland with death camps nearby and Ukrainian and Nazi soldiers hunting the Jews, 24/7. It's really a story of survival, of hope, of faith, and most importantly of love, and the love that she had for her mother, her sister, and her family, and the idea that they were possibly still living. So I do a little slideshow in the schools, and one of the slides I put up is Ellie Wiesel, author of Night, required reading in many school systems, and the quote about how, you can't be silent. Silence only helps the perpetrator. It doesn't help the victim. So I kind of translate that to the classes of these young children into bullying. Yes, ethnic cleansing and genocide is very extreme bullying, but it is still a form of bullying. And I tell these children, if you're being bullied, you have to speak up. You have to tell someone. You have to go to your parents, to your counselor at school, to your teachers, tell your friends, and talk about it and do something about it, because otherwise these bullies are going to continue to do the same thing. And the next child that they bully is somewhat on your hands. You have to take action when something like that happens. And I think the teachers really, really appreciated that. I also talk about role models, and Charlene is my role model. Charlene is my hero. I think about her every day. I have stuff posted in my office on the walls. I have all kinds of little reminders about Charlene here in my office and near my computer. And I talk to kids about role models. Don't just pick a role model because they've got a great music video, or, find out who they are and what they do, and are they good, giving people. If you're going to have a role model, you've got to have some depth to it. And I talked about how I've done all these, charity events through my fundraising efforts, and all the famous people that I've met. I've met over a couple hundred very famous people. And I said, like Rod Stewart, like Vander Holyfield, like Charlie Daniels, and all these middle schoolers are looking at each other like, who's he talking about? And then I realized I've kind of aged myself, and I'm going to need to change that line when I speak to the middle schools in the future. But the point is that all those famous people I've met, none of them can hold a candle to Charlene. Like I said, what an incredible human that was so kind and so gentle-spirited. I've never met anyone like her. before, and I don't think I ever will. Just an incredible person. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that's in development right now, and that is the film/TV series based on Child of the Forest. We're still looking at different ways to go with this, but we are really making headway now. And the best way to keep up with that project is to go to the website, childoftheforest.com or jackgrossman.com, and sign up for the free newsletter. I have to admit that during COVID, I just let everything kind of go. It was just not a good experience for me. And I didn't, really enjoy, the process of having to move over to a virtual event. I love in-person crowds and I love the energy in a room. So I kind of let the newsletter go and a few things go, but I'm back on top now. I'll be hiring here a social media expert to take over that process again for me. So if you want to stay in touch on that, because it will be filmed in North Carolina, and that's exciting. And it is a major, major production. Very, very excited about it. I can tell you this, that I have a top key producer out of Hollywood, out of California, that's coming on board and is going to help direct this entire thing and make it super professional and the best that it can possibly be. I am so honored. No, it is not Steven Spielberg, for anybody thinking that, but I can tell you that as someone as capable and just super professional, former studio executive that loved the story, happens to be Jewish, and wants to help tell it to the entire world. So also something new that's very exciting is that the audiobook is now available, and that's something that I've been wanting to do. And my wife and I auditioned a bunch of different narrators, voiceover artists, to come up with the perfect voice to read the story. This lady is a film actor and a voice actor and speaks fluent Polish and has a Polish accent and does an amazing job in reading the story and bringing it to life. So you read the book and felt like you were there in the forest. If you listen to the audiobook, you will even feel that more intensely. She did such an outstanding job, and the audiobook's available through Audible, audiobook.com, Amazon, basically 51 different global outlets where you can pick that up. And I'm going to talk to Jonathan after this, and I would like to get a few free promo audiobooks out to some of the folks that are interested in that. So Jonathan, we'll talk about that later. Also, I'm working on a curriculum for middle schools initially, but eventually for high schools and universities, but initially for middle schools because there is interest through the North Carolina Council of the Holocaust to present this reading to all of the middle schools in the state of North Carolina. And the problem is I had it all ready to go right before COVID hit. And then there were no more classroom settings. Everything went virtual. So I am in the midst of producing the curriculum virtually in an interactive fashion. So that's very exciting. That's something to look for. I had a regional teacher of the year at one of the schools where I did some readings to her 2 middle school classes. And she really helped with this tremendously and did an amazing job. So what I'll do now is I can take some questions and answers and then get back into a few other thoughts, but I don't know if you have a mechanism there set up for if the students can walk up to the mic and ask a question, or if they're just going to raise their hand and then you relay the question to me. But I'm prepared now to do a few Q&As. Give you a couple minutes to think that through. Here we go.
All right, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. This is Ms. Schluter, so thank you. We shared your book with our students and asked them to take some time to come up with some questions. And so who wants to be the first one? All right, awesome.
Oh, okay. I just was wondering if interviewing her and asking her to repeat this story was traumatic for her at any point. Like, did she ever break down, or was it hard to capture all the details because of everything?
That's a great question. I can tell you that there were times that she broke down and I broke down with her, and there were, certain, chapters within the story. Obviously, the river scene is the most intense in terms of that's, when she lost her mother. And that is typically the number one question asked at book clubs and school readings and such from those that have read the book, and, what happened to her mother. And we had a lot of discussion about that. And really, the bottom line is that, Charlene felt that her mother probably drowned, slipped into the water, drowned, and drifted away, in the current of the river. I can't see any way that her mother would have left her on purpose or somehow thought that that would be safer. So really that makes the most amount of sense. But yeah, there were times where it was very difficult, and did a lot of interviews with her, and many in person, some on film, and many over the phone. And it was hard.
So you talked about just like how intense like a lot of the events of the book are. So I was wondering how you navigated the emotional and traumatic events of trying to piece together the story.
Well, number one was chronological order in the way that things happen, so the story would unfold in the most accurate way possible. It was very important for Charlene. When we did what we call a story rights agreement, allowing me to be able to document and tell her story by film and or by book, it was important to her that the project wasn't sold outright to like a studio in Hollywood where they would embellish the story. She felt, and of course I felt, that the story did not need any embellishing. There was so much substance and these compelling, what I would call episodes or chapters of the story, just one right after the other. Why would you want to embellish this story? So could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry about that. I kind of sidetracked.
I was wondering just like how both you and Charlene like navigated like the emotional
Right.
traumatic nature of writing the book.
Yeah, well, I can tell you this, as we reviewed and I interviewed her, as did James Buchanan later on. He didn't interview her, but he interviewed witnesses and friends and a rabbi, so that we could pull the whole story together. When she would recount the various stories like the haystack really hit me, as they all did, and Paranka, another one where you thought finally maybe here there's some hope, and she's got some help and she's getting warm food and some new clothing, that maybe this is a turning point, but it doesn't work out that way. It was just a tough process, and she did relive, I think every time that she told her story, whether in audiences or to me or to small groups, I believe that she relived a part of it to, to feel the emotion connected to it.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is, do you believe Musha felt guilt for the massacre of the first group of survivors that she had met in this chapter of the haystack? Dora, Leo, Jacob.
She may have felt guilt, but I think that, as her mother, most certainly, would reinforce with her that there was no choice, there was nothing else they could do. The final liquidation meant they were going to kill all the Jews, including, Musha and her mother. So it was their only way of escape was just to leave it behind and focus on their individual survival. So I think, yes, she felt guilty, but I think she realized, there was no other option. Good question, though.
You mentioned that this story was like hard for you because of the experiences. What's something that kept you going?
Oh, great question. You just gave me chills, actually. Really was my vow, my promise to her to do this. I suffered through a near-death stroke. I had to learn how to walk again. I mean, I was entirely paralyzed on the left side of my body and unable to work for about 1.5 years. And so I had a lot of different things to overcome. When she passed in 2013, that was extremely difficult for me. But I think ultimately it was my promise to her and to keep that promise of telling her story to the world. And which is one reason, and the book's doing a great job. The audiobook's gonna do another great job, but really when we bring this to the next level here and bring it to the screen, whether it be film or episodic series, that's gonna be really when this unfolds, and I can say that I fulfilled my promise.
Were there ever parts in the story where she not necessarily remembered, but she got to a point and she didn't know how she actually got there? Or were there points where there were gaps in the story because it was so traumatic that she, like her brain may have just blocked it out because it was so traumatic for her?
I don't think so. She was very intellectual. She spoke 5 languages, and she had incredible recollection. I can tell you that there were some things in the story that were so disturbing to her. She had told me personally that, the part where she was eating raw rats was just extremely disturbing to her, and she didn't like thinking about it. I even considered just for a brief moment, of somehow leaving that out just in respect for her feelings, but then that wouldn't be the true story and the real story. But, I can imagine her, her disgust with having to do that. So I hope that answers your question, but yes.
Hi. Do you anticipate any difficulty in being able to encapsulate her story in a movie or episodic way?
That is an outstanding question, and that is why I am surrounding myself by the absolute top professionals in the industry, from writing, direction, producing, everything, because there is the challenge of her mother speaking to her when she's in the forest. And that is something that, from a creative standpoint, has to be done properly, and to emit the emotion and the circumstance that it does in the book, but bringing that to a screen is even more difficult. So that was really a good question. That's the biggest challenge, in my opinion.
So as you were just saying how encapsulating the voice of the mother is going to be the most difficult part of the film or the movie, did she ever explain or talk about how that affected her mental health?
It absolutely kept her going. And I don't know if that was just a defense mechanism that was brought out by her being in the situation she was in, but she had such a deep love for her mother, as she did with her sister and father. But ultimately, it was the love for her mother and the belief that she was still living and the belief that she was going to see her again and be reunited that drove her to survive. I mean, she was very, tomboyish in a sense, and was able to, climb trees and run and do things that helped her in her survival. She was very intelligent, but sometimes, she ate the wrong berries, and, what do you do in that situation? Very, very difficult, but, it was ultimately the love of her mother, I believe, that allowed her and drove her to survive. And that voice, constantly reinforcing and telling her and making suggestions. And I think that was a key part of her survival.
Obviously, Misha's stories has a big impact on anyone who reads it, but how has it impacted how you interact with your family, and what words of encouragement would you want your daughters to hear during times of struggle?
Another great question. That's a great question. I can tell you how it has impacted me. For example, I have found that if, it's a chilly morning here in North Carolina, my car's in the driveway, I've got frost on the windshield, I'm running a little bit late for a meeting, and I go out and I think, oh, darn, I've got to, warm up my car, and I got to scrape the windshield. I pull out a credit card or whatever, and I start scraping, and then the little shavings get on my hand, and now my hand's cold. And then I stop. I just literally stop myself and go, Jack, what are you doing? This is nothing compared to what Charlene had to live through. And we all do that. We get a flat tire and it's like the end of the world. Our phone dies or anything. There's a million things that, but they're minor. They really are minor. And we need to keep life in perspective and realize there's some people that are really going through some hard stuff, but we get so conditioned, I think, by society that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late for this meeting, or, what am I going to do? And you'll get through it. I promise you, you'll get through it. And you just kind of have to think that through. My wife and children have really kind of ingrained this feeling as well in their own lives. And, they've met Charlene. Charlene actually came in for our youngest daughter's bat mitzvah here to Mooresville. We sent her an invitation. We didn't really think that she would come, but she did. And it was just so meaningful to us to have her there, because that's the daughter that took the trip to DC when I met her. But they've brought this into their lives as much as I have. And it's just kind of something, you think about on a daily basis. Like I said, she really is a role model and my hero. And, if you were to ask me who was your hero or role model before that, I don't even know that I had one. I might have said something like Tony Robbins or something motivational, because I read a lot of motivational stuff. And that's, I think, what has helped me with my perseverance and my persistence, overcoming my stroke, learning how to walk again, and still keeping on my path with getting her story out there. So, but she has had a huge impact on my life and my family's life and many readers. If you read the reviews to me, I mean, they have brought me to tears just reading the reviews. They're just absolutely wonderful and really pleasing and satisfying to me that people, have reacted the way they have reacted. And being shaken to the core is not a bad thing. I think we all need to be shaken to the core at some point about something. Otherwise, you're just cruising through life. So, that was another very, very good question.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Paul Schluter. I'm the father-in-law of this young lady here, Amber Schluter. Amber and I talked about this class and what she was doing, and I said, well, Amber, I'll be happy to help you a little bit. And so she bought your book, and I said, well, I'll just read the book, and then we'll talk about it and kind of go from there. So I will tell you that I'm 74. I've been through the Vietnam War. I was wounded twice. But the only reason I tell you that is because reading this book was one of the hardest things I've done in my life. It was an incredible emotional roller coaster. The first 2 chapters were kind of like, oh my gosh, I got to put this book down. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. And this lady, you could almost rename your book The Person with the Greatest Number of Miracles in Their Life. And everything that you have said, sir, and about your book, I felt and saw and believed and related to. Terrific job. And I think it's really kind of remarkable that we have this horror of horrors that existed back during World War II for the Jewish folks, and then here we are, the world sensing probably a little bit of that through the Ukraine war. The horrors that's going on over there, probably nothing compared to the numbers and the atrocities that the Jews had to went through. But I think it did a super job. I was curious about whether, and you may have answered this question, was there anything you did not put in the book that maybe now you wish you had? You probably didn't because, again, I think you covered everything real well, and I applaud you and thank you for the book.
First of all, sir, thank you for your service. That really means a lot to me. My father, rest in peace, served in World War II on a PT boat. But nothing was left out. Nothing, was left out. And, I thank you so much for your review. And I understand completely the difficulty in you reading it. And like I said, there have been 2 types of readers, the readers that couldn't put it down and the readers that had to put it down. And that just makes total sense to me. I wish that everyone had the opportunity to meet Charlene. I brought her to a high school here in our town, and she spoke to a small class. I don't remember if it was a history class. And when she was done, every student got up, walked onto the stage, single file, waited in line so they could each individually greet her. And so many were in tears and shaking her hand and hugging her, embraced her, and just felt that connection because that's the kind of person she was. She was just, very warm and very giving. So anyway, thank you, sir, for your comments, and much appreciated.
I have a question, and then if anybody else, guys, please raise your hand. I have some history as an English teacher, especially in middle school, and have you thought about creating a young adult version of your book, or maybe working with someone to create a graphic novel and just maybe expand the ways that you're telling this story?
I have given some thought to that. Right now, I've got so much on my plate with the film/episodic series, early development, getting some things wrapped up and really preparing to take off with that. And that's going to take a year plus to produce and develop and distribute and release and all of those things associated with it. My wife and I were invited to attend a children's playhouse here in Mooresville at a local venue downtown. And it was the play Anne Frank and Me. It wasn't the typical Diary of Anne Frank. It was a different take on it that was more geared towards the very young market, or I would say up to high school market, right? And it was not anything like what we expected. And at first, we didn't know if we should be offended as Jews in the audience because some of the participants and actors in the play were portraying children that denied the Holocaust happened because their parents denied the Holocaust happened. And we were like, whoa, where's this thing going? And then it really did a phenomenal job, the writers, the actors, everyone, of putting the whole thing together and making sense of it, that this is how you answer those people, or this is how you address those questions. And it did such a good job that I spoke to my friend who's involved with that playhouse. You know, what do you think if there was a story like this based on Child of the Forest that could reach, you know, younger audiences? She thought it would be phenomenal. So, you know, that's on my back burner as a potential idea. But, you know, you're right. I mean, this story really should be told to all ages. You know, it's important for us to get a good rating so that, you know, 13-year-olds can see this without any difficulty, and or 12-year-olds. But yeah, that has occurred to me, and that's a good point. You know, and here I am thinking, wow, at first I thought middle schoolers were too young to have this book read in their class, or for them to have, you know, book participation based on Child of the Forest. And I can tell you that there are the reviews from the teachers, and it's their favorite book, and how meaningful it is, how incredible it is. The classes love it. A lot of times I'll zoom in where the students can, you know, can ask a question live if I'm doing it virtually. And they love that part of it. I hope you all are too, but yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, we probably have one or two more questions. Does anybody?
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay, here's one.
Hi. So
Hi.
I know that the interview process with Musha probably took like a lot of time and a lot of interviews and stuff. What do you think was the most impactful moment during the interview process for you and Musha?
Wow, another really good question. You know, each of the stories, the haystack, Paranka, her little grave, you know, being rescued at the last moment by a Russian liberation soldier that stepped on her little grave. I mean, all of those were so impactful. But I would have to say, when we got into deep discussion about her mom at the river, probably the most emotional and the deepest thought, I think, went into that. And you could just tell how it really shook her up. So if I had to pin it down to one part of an interview, it would probably be when we discussed the river scene. Although the whole story, as you know, was very compelling.
Hi. How did receiving an Americanized name, Charlene, like affect her? How did that go? Like, how did she feel about it?
I think she was happy to assimilate. Like I said, she spoke 5 languages. She was warmly accepted in her community. You know, and you got to realize that right after the field hospital and, you know, where she was rescued, it still took her 4 years to get over here to the US. It was a very difficult process to convince them that she would be taken care of, and the government didn't have to worry about her. Her family was going to take care of her. But you know, she, I think, really wanted to assimilate. And I don't think that had any bearing on how she felt, you know, about her roots.
Thank you. Do we have any other last quick questions?
Sure.
You sure? That's good. Awesome. I think that's all of our questions. Thank you so much. This has been super powerful.
Okay. Thank you all very, very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break.
No, just stand up a minute.
Okay, she's there.
Okay, good morning. I wanted to welcome our next presenter. Dr. Zev Soharel is a survivor of Auschwitz, Mauthausen, and Ebeni's concentration camps. So he's going to share his story with us today, and he is joined by his wife, but I apologize, I did not get her name, so hopefully he will introduce her as well. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your story with our students. And students, if you will think about questions you might have, and we will hopefully have some time for those questions at the end. So thank you.
I can see.
Yeah, no, go
I
ahead.
cannot see now. Okay. Good midday. As I was introduced to you, I am a survivor of Auschwitz, Mauthausen, and Ebensee, and I was lucky to survive. And I was 15 when I was liberated, and many, many years since then. And today I have the pleasure of being introduced to you and sharing with you my presentations. To begin with, I would like for you to take from me 3 elements that I would like for you to have. The first one is, what is there to remember about World War II years? Well, when you will be spending more time looking at the historical reviews of Germany, 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, Germany was in the forefront of European countries in just about any area that you can identify: art, literature, science, industry, and so on. And it was considered one of the more enlightened of the European nations. Now, for that nation to make it possible for an evil character with the name of Hitler to come into power, and what Hitler has managed to do in the years that he was in leadership, of not only getting Nazi Germany or Germany to become Nazi Germany, but also to have a number of other countries join them, allied nations, Austria, Ukraine, and of the European countries, some others that joined with time, including Hungary. And away from Europe, Japan also joined them. So all those evil nations, what they have managed to do, they ended the lives of 11 million persons. Of the 11 million persons, obviously 6 million were Jewish persons and 5 million others. Among the Jewish persons, 1.5 million were children, 15 or younger. Now, for an evil nation with the name of Nazi Germany to manage to do all those evil doings, it's hard to understand how what was before an enlightened nation to make it possible for them to do all the evil things. And the second term then, the first one is what to remember. And as you will look at the internet in books that are available, you can read more and more, both about the first one, which I said, remember. The second term is, who are those that need to be honored? Well, the most important entity that needs to be honored are the World War II veterans. Have any family members of the grandparents of yours that served in the World War II, had it not been for World War II veterans that brought about the and if you have a chance to be either at the United States Holocaust Museum or at Yad Vashem in the state of Israel, in both places, they have a list of the righteous persons, either individuals or groups that risk their own lives in order to make something good, in order to save one or a group of other persons. So remember, honor. But then the most important thing for me, and the reason that I am pleased to have this pleasure and opportunity to address you, is to reflect. What I want of you, young persons, think about your future and project yourself, aspire to achieve. And what for me would be of importance, and the reason that I want to speak to you is, one, how to make your family as good as possible, how to make your community as good as possible. And then further on, as you aspire and you have responsible positions, how do you contribute to making the state of North Carolina better? And then even further up, this United States to be as good a country as it can be. Now, these three terms, make yourself notes. Remember what is there to remember about World War II, what is there to honor, and what is to reflect for you. And I'll come back at the end of my presentation about the reflections. You are looking at me, and I had my 92nd birthday. Lucky for me, had it not been that I survived, I would not be here to be able to present, to make my presentations. My origins, I was born in a small village in Transylvania that was then part of Romania. And growing up, what I remember from those days, that we lived in a small village, and in that village there were no stores, so you couldn't go anywhere to buy any food or anything. So whatever we managed to grow on our farm is what we had. And our origins from the Ukraine, and I know what's occurring now in the Ukraine, but my grandfather and his brother, they managed to sell their property in the area that, if you have seen or you will see Fiddler on the Roof, it was that part of Ukraine where that occurred. They sold their property and came to Transylvania, where they brought the property where we had our life and living. As I indicated to you, no stores to go and buy anything, but just whatever we managed to grow on our farm is what our nutrition was. And having lived there, I attended a school, and unlike you, that you have your sophisticated teachers and your good learning, I learned very little. For 4 years, I was in that village, and from age of 6 until the age of 10, I had to attend the school there, and the teacher managed to teach us to read and to write, and even a little math, but to add and subtract. So the first week, I learned all that the teacher wanted for us to know. And after that, I would bring books with me to the school in order to spend the time that I had to spend at going. And we had a very friendly dog, that the dog would walk with me to the school and wait for me until I was free to go home. obviously from 8 until 12, and at 12 I was ready to go home, so we would walk back home. So that was for 4 years my educational experience in the village called Borgo. And in 1940, my parents wanted for me to get a better education, so they decided to sell the property and to move to a nearby city, which was about 6 miles or 10 kilometers away from the village where I was born. And in 1940, we moved to the city called Baia and later Nagybánya. And in 1940, the Hungarian government decided to join the Nazis. And in that fashion, they got control over what was before in Romanian called Transylvania, is now Erdély in Hungary. And here is just that you have a sense what was life for about 40 years from 1940 until 1944. I wanted to attend school, and the principal there let us Jewish kids come to school, but only to the school area, and would not even let us go into the building, but outside, throw all kind of insults at us in this way and that way. And then after about 15, 20 minutes that he would throw the insults at us, he sent us back home, that we did not deserve to get an education. So this is what the Hungarian government has done, of putting a principle of this character. In addition, the limitations that we had, we were allowed, the Jewish persons in that city, Baia Nagybánya, to be out for 2 hours every day. So either from 8 to 10, from 9 to 11, or if it was afternoon, from 2 to 4, or from 3 to 5, 2 hours a day, the rest of the time locked in your properties and couldn't go out. So that was for 4 years my life of being in the property that we had. And the only thing I could do, we had a little area where I could do some gardening and to grow some whatever could be grown in the garden. But other than that, I could not go out on the street because we were not allowed. So imagine 2 hours you are allowed to go around, and the rest of the time you are restricted. So from 1940 until 1944, that was my life. And my father, should rest in peace, who was an engineer, was not allowed to go to work. So he was also 22 of the 24 hours, he was locked in and at home and so on. So this was our life until 1944. And then the Hungarian government decided that they will put us in ghettos. If you heard the term ghetto, you would know what that means. It was a building, a building that was like closed from all the sides, and no one was allowed to go anywhere other than just stay there and stay there and stay there. And that was for a few weeks until the cattle cars arrived. And the cattle cars were supposed to take us from the ghetto to Auschwitz. You heard probably the term of Auschwitz and what was that about. And I will share with you a little bit about what I have experienced there. And they put us on the cattle cars, and the cattle cars moved. And after about 12 hours, we arrived at Auschwitz. And we arrived at Auschwitz. It was a beautiful night full of stars, but stench. And I was there. If you have a chance to be at Auschwitz, you will realize what they have done there, that there was first a building that looked like a shower, but when you walked in, it would be gas that would come out and people lost their lives. And the technology would push people out, burn them, and then ashes thrown away. And all of that, that was that was the experience there. So the morning, I was trying to walk toward the selection site, but the first thing what they did, they separated man from woman. And now what they were supposed to do for the group of men, those that were 15 or younger, 50 or older, to send to be burned alive there. And I was walking toward the selection for whatever reason, and I was 14 years old at the time. For whatever reason, one of the SS guard in Russian asked me what was my age. I told him 14. And I remember the words that he used. "Не кажи никому." Don't tell anyone you are 14. Tell them you are 17. Well, if I get that advice, what I did when I came to the selection site, when they asked me what was my age, my birth date, I told them instead 1930, 1927. To this day, I'm getting reparations of about $600 a month. And all the documents from Germany, I was 3 years older. I was born 1927 instead of 1930. And when the selection was over, three of us, my brother and I, and my father should rest in peace, we were put on cattle cars that shipped us to Austria, first to a place called Mauthausen, and from Mauthausen to a place called Ebensee. And at Ebensee, I spent a whole year. The first 6 months at Ebensee, two things. One, I worked in what was to become an underground tunnel because the Austrians wanted to put valuable things in that site. So I did what I had to do there and do what the work that was there. My father should rest in peace. He, after 3 months, was not able to continue his life. He lost his life there, and he was shipped to Mauthausen, where he was burned and turned to ashes. And we have a tradition that we go to a place where you lost someone. And I visited a number of times Mauthausen, where he was burned, and to say the prayer, the Kaddish prayer in his memory. Anyway, but after 6 months, they changed my assignments, and I was instructed to go to another working place, and that working place was to produce construction materials, sand, small stones, and so on. But one day a week, I was selected because the site was called Gisgrube Marian Guest House. It was across the street from a guest house, and the owner of the guest house had a barn, and I was selected in order to go in once a week to clean the barn. So given that I was a inmate, I was not trusted to just go in and do the cleaning. An SS guard would walk me toward the barn, and they would set up a nice stable for the SS guard. And the owner of the guest house has a daughter who was my age, and she would bring me some dry food, a piece of bread with something, bread and cheese, or some pasta, dry pasta, whatever she could, and always make me the sign of not to tell anyone that she was doing that. So once a week, I had the additional nutrition that the daughter of the guest house owner would bring me, and that's apparently that contributed to my being able to do it. What I want to say to you, young persons, I was then from the age of 14 until the age of 15 at that site. And what I managed to do is do what I felt like that I had to do. And I was asked a number of times, how did you manage? My honest answer is, I don't know. The reason that I thought that I would go, whatever I had to do in terms of the work of the day, I would do it. And in my thinking cap, I was in charge at the site where I had to do the work. I did the work, and when they were bringing us back to the camp at Ebensee, where I had to stay overnight, I did what I had to do to be as clean as I could be and so on. And that was my life until May of 1945, and that was about a year after we were taken to Auschwitz. And the 3rd Cavalry arrived there. And when the 3rd Cavalry arrived there, what we noticed is that the guards that took care of us disappeared. And now the 3rd Cavalry was there, and people, as the gates opened, started walking out, and I was walking with them, and that's the last thing that I remember about Abens and myself. And apparently what happened to me as I was walking out, before I was walking out, I got typhoid, and with the typhoid, I fell into a roadside ditch. When I came back, I was in a health services site, and the nurse there in German told me, "Eine schwarze Soldat," which means one black soldier brought you here. Well, I was there at that health services site for about 3 weeks, and after about 3 weeks, whatever they did for me, I came back feeling pretty good. And I decided that I'm going to go back to where I was from. And what I did is I hitched rides, because not having money or resources, the only thing that I had at the service site, they have given me a shirt, a pair of pants, underpants, and that's what I had, not even a jacket or anything. But this was now the end of May, so it was not bad. And the only way that I could go is hitch rides. I hitched rides until I came to Wiener Neustadt, a place that was to be crossing the Danube River, and they held me there for a few weeks. But after a few weeks, I hitched rides and train transport, and I got to Budapest first, then back to the place where I was born. And I didn't want to stay there. So what I decided to do is, I knew that I had an uncle here in the United States. I wrote him a nice letter asking him to sponsor me. And if he would sponsor me, then I would be able to come to the United States. Well, I was there waiting. And after a couple of weeks, I decided I'm going to go back and see how I can hitch a ride in order to get. So I hitched rides until I got to a place called Bergen-Belsen, which was in Germany, that was divided into 4 parts. The US controlled, British controlled, Russian controlled, and French controlled. And I was in the British controlled section in a place called Bergen-Belsen. While I was there waiting, I could not come to the United States because the United States, they agreed to let Holocaust survivors come in 1950. But I was there now in 1946 and waiting and waiting. So given that at that place, there was the British military, and parts of the British military were the Palestine Jewish Brigade. I joined them to help them in any way what they were doing. And the main function that they were doing is helping persons that illegally wanted to go to Palestine. So I was with them there until it was decided that they should go back to Palestine, and they embraced me and they asked me if I knew about Palestine. I didn't know much of anything, but I was with them and they took me back with them to Egypt and arrived at Palestine. I was 16 years old. And while I was at 16 years old and arrived at Palestine, for whatever reason, I didn't know what to do. And I volunteered to serve with whatever I could serve. And I was assigned with caravans to take nutrition from the area. If you have any idea what Palestine was today, the state of Israel, from the Tel Aviv area, which is near the Mediterranean, up to Jerusalem with caravans. And that's what I've been doing for about 6 months until I had the privilege of having the opportunity to volunteer to serve with the military. And I volunteered. I was there now almost 17 years old. I volunteered to serve with the Palestine Palmach Jewish Brigade, which was the elite military unit. And for about a year, I served and participated in the whatever military activities I needed to participate, and did what I could do in order to assist with them. And about a year later, in 1948, the person who was then the Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, declared of the establishment of the State of Israel, and the United Nations approved that in the May of 1948. And I served until 49 with the Palmach Harel Brigade. And at one of the reunions, we decided, several of us, that we want to change our name. Whatever our name was before should change to last name of Harel. So you heard in the introduction that my name is Zev Soharel, and the reason for it is because they decided to change my name from what was before to Harel, and so that's became my last name. And I was in Israel then from 1946 for a good number of years. And in addition to my military service, when I was done with the military service, I served in the part of the year that I have to continue to serve in reconnaissance. And given that I have done what I have done, I was there until 1945. And to begin with, until 1965. To begin with, after liberation from military service, I was in a collective settlement called kibbutz. And what I enjoyed doing, I worked as a truck driver. Now, I don't know what you think about being a truck driver, but for me, that was the height of my aspiration. I was so happy to be able to be a truck driver and to do that work, but the collective settlement decided I should be a youth educator. Whereas you heard me already what I said about my education, I had no education. So the collective settlement decided I should go to a teachers collective seminar. So for 3 years, I attended a teachers seminar. And in the process, I learned what I could learn there. And when I came back, I was a youth educator. And I've worked for 40 years to be a youth educator with children, youth from Egypt, Morocco, Iran, Iraq, and so on. And I did that kind of work now, helping them to prepare to pass a high school diploma. And along with that, when they passed the high school test, I decided I'll do also. I tried, and then at the age of 30, I became a high school graduate. Obviously, if you know about education, when you are 18 years old, usually you end your high school and you get your degree. I got my high school degree at the age of 30. And then, I don't know how, but I also had the privilege of attending the Hebrew University and studying for and having my first degree from the Hebrew University after 4 years. And at the age of 34, age of 33, I had my undergraduate degree from the Hebrew University, and I got a job to be director of the youth village called Fargalim in the state of Israel. And then, lucky me, I don't know how that happened, but the National Council of Jewish Women from the United States brought 4 fellowships for persons that had undergrad degrees in Israel to come to the United States to get a graduate education. And so I got money monthly for the fellowship in order to be able to attend a university. And I didn't want to go to New York because I learned that New York was a big city, and someone advised me that there is a smaller area, a smaller community where there's a very good university with the name of Michigan. So 1965, at the University of Michigan, I had the good fortune, and you see this attractive lady that sits next to me. We had our eyes on each other, and in 1966, 1 year later, we got married. And we had almost a year ago, we had our 55th anniversary. So lucky for me, I met my partner 55 years ago. And with her help, I had to come and get my PhD in the United States, because when I was at Michigan, after I got my master's degree there, I got also a job, and I had a monthly pay, and I thought that was the height of my aspiration. But she encouraged me to go and get a PhD. And at Washington University in St. Louis, I got a fellowship and I got my PhD. And after that, after wandering around in about a year after my graduation, we both got positions, employment in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio, and I got my first job to be director of research at the Benjamin Rose Institute, and my partner got, since she was a social worker also, she was a director of social work in various positions. And so we spent about 40 years in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was, after working at Cleveland State for 40 years, I got to be professor there. And today I'm professor emeritus, because about 9 years ago, we decided that was enough and we will move to North Carolina. And we came here because our younger daughter resides here, and we have been here for 9 years. But what happened here, being retired, the North Carolina Holocaust Council found out that while I was living in Ohio, in Cleveland, I was involved with the survivor community there called the Called Israel Foundation. And given that I was involved in Holocaust education, they asked me to volunteer, and I volunteered to serve with North Carolina Holocaust Council. And I've been working with them, assisting them to go around. And before the coronavirus arrived here in the United States, we had the pleasure of getting familiar with the state of North Carolina by being at junior high, high school, colleges, universities, and so on, in order to make presentations. And we have done that together. And lucky for me, because I had the partnership of my partner here, that she would be assisting me to go wherever I had the pleasure of going. And until 3 years ago, until the coronavirus arrived, we have been wandering around at various sites in the state. But after the coronavirus came, so we are no longer going to the places, we're just doing what we are doing here. And then on Zoom, I'll make my presentations, and lucky for me, at the age of 92, I can still do that. And it was really a pleasure in order to knock on your thinking caps. And I want to encourage you, if I can, a little bit of three things. The first thing, what I said in the reflection, the United States is a land of diversity. And as you know, the origins of where people are from, there is no other place like the United States that has the kind of diversity that the United States has. So young faces, do all that you can to have respect for diversity. The second thing that I'll encourage you is do everything that you can in acts of benevolence for your family, for your community, whatever you can, in order to do the best that you can. And the third thing that I would like to encourage you, each and every one of you, I'm knocking on your thinking caps. You should have aspirations because you are the future. And given that you are the future, I want you to be as encouraged as you can make yourself to have your aspirations. What is it that you want to achieve? And with that, I will end my presentation. And if you have questions, I'll be here to try to answer those. Thank you for being such a good audience.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your story. Does anybody want to go first with a question? Okay, great.
Hi, I don't necessarily have a question. I'm sure you've gotten like millions of thanks, but I just want to thank you because we were just listening to what you were saying, and on a daily as teenagers and young people, we complain like, oh, we have homework, oh, I have to go to work, like just daily struggles. But listening to you and the struggles that you've overcome, I should never complain about anything, and you inspire me.
Well, could you repeat that, please? A little slower. We both have a little hearing issues.
I'm just going to reiterate what Adonis said. She was just saying how as a teenager, an American teenager, there's a lot of complaining about homework and not getting enough sleep and all kinds of things, and how grateful she is to have had the opportunity to hear you, and that you've really inspired her, that she has no reason to complain about anything, just hearing how much you've overcome. So she's really grateful and appreciates that so much.
Well, thank you very much for your very, very kind appraisal.
Thank you. And then I actually have a question. As far as, I'm just in awe of hearing you speak and so grateful of your time and sharing your story. What would you say is the most lasting effect that being a Holocaust survivor has had on like your life long term?
Well, the most important thing, to begin with, the most important thing was to survive. And what I have learned from that is that you need to have the courage to go on and do anything and everything that you can. And apparently that's what made it possible for me at the age of 14 until the age of 15 to do what I had to do in order to survive. And after that, whatever I had to do in my life, first to serve in the War of Independence of the State of Israel, and then whatever I had to do in order to do the work and so on. Had it not been for my meeting other survivors, when we were in Cleveland, there was the Call Israel Foundation, an association of Holocaust survivors. Until I met them, I really didn't have a sense of share and do what we can. And what the Association of Holocaust Survivors that we have done for needy Holocaust survivors to help them in order to do the best that they can. And given that I got to be professor and having had my research experiences, lucky for me, I got funding for researchers and so on. And I got to do some good things nationally and internationally. And I was invited to speak various parts of Europe, and including even outside of Europe, in Australia. I've been around. I was very, very, very thankful for being able to do so. I try to think of what is it that can be done in order to be as good as you can be to anyone, everyone that you are. And what I want to encourage each and every one of you, one thing that I can be very proud of, that I have not done anything to hurt anyone. Any person that I have encountered since the days when I was a youth educator on the collective settlement where I was at the kibbutz, and then later on when I was professor, any persons that I encountered, like I have done whatever things I could do, like at Cleveland State, I encouraged for not to give a failing grade, just incompletes, and to encourage the incompletes to go on. And so I did along the way what I could, and I feel good about what I managed to do. And I feel good that I don't have to turn my head away from anyone that I will encounter. And to this day, whenever someone knocks on my whatever identity here or there, always hearing good things about. So each and every one of you, if you aspire to be as good as you can be, I hope that you will manage to do that.
Thank you so much. That's powerful. I really appreciate your time.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I just wanted to ask you, how were you able to move through the grief associated with losing your father and experiencing the tragedy of the Holocaust? How were you able to move through that and kind of come out on the other side as you have today?
Well, obviously, one important element, and that's a very good question, because what I have learned along the way, that I had the courage not to let anything that hurt me to affect me, to try to do what I could in order to continue and doing what I can. And what I want to share with you is that while I was at Cleveland State, I had a number of research projects, and one of the research projects had to do with quality of life. And what I have learned in that project is, and I would knock on your thinking cap of each and every one of you, to have the courage, number one, is to have the courage to aspire and achieve. And that's very, very important, to be courageous to do what you can. And second thing, to do what you can. Physical activities and whatever it is that you have the opportunity to do it, and try to do it as well as you can. And the third thing is also emotionally. Anything that you enjoy, embrace and have that with you. Anything that you don't think is good for you, including losses or anything else, try to keep it away. Don't let that settle with you. So do the best that you can in that kind of way, each and every one of you, and you will be important persons in your life and living. And lucky for me, you know, given the life expectancy in the United States for men is less than 80, and I had my 92nd birthday. So I'm very thankful that I can keep on, and I'm lucky to have the partner that I have, and for us to be able to do what we can in order to continue our life and living.
I just had a question, not more so about what you do now. What are things that you enjoy, and do you think that your past may have pushed you to do things now that you may not have been able to do before, like previously?
What do you enjoy doing now, and what from the past, like the garden, do you still like to do?
Well, what I want to say is that in life, whether you are a teenager, whether you are a young adult, an adult person, try to do what you can in order to enjoy doing. And even when you have restrictions that you cannot do it, and I shared with you that, like, you know, from the age of 10 until the age of 14, we had the privilege of being out of the house for 2 hours a day. And inside our house, do what you can. So whatever it is that I was able to do along the way, like the garden work that I was doing there, or whatever I can do in order to help someone, or whatever you can do in order to feel better about what you can do. Not to let the things that are not good for you, and even when you are by yourself, well, now for 55 years, I'm lucky that I have the partner that we enjoy our life together. And we have one sign that my partner here has picked that's called Lucky Us. But also it's important for someone who can say, lucky me, that I can do what I can do and that I don't hurt anyone, but I can do what I can do in order to feel as good as I can about me and to do the things that I feel good about.
Hello. This question is for your wife. Whenever you guys first met each other at university, were you aware that he was a Holocaust survivor? And if not, what was your reaction when he first told you that that he was a Holocaust survivor?
Well, no, thank you for the question. No, I wasn't aware. But, you know, obviously we were both in the School of Social Work, so we had a lot of things in common. I had also been to Israel, and so we, you know, although he lived there a long time, I didn't, but we had that in common. I had, you know, I'm also Jewish, and growing up, I had a very good Sunday school education, and we did learn about the Holocaust, and I did some reading on my own. And when I was in high school, I don't remember the name of the book, but there was, as a kid, I wondered how could people do that to each other? And when I read this book, I began to realize, that yes, they could, and it outlined very clearly, what had happened during the Holocaust. So I was, had some awareness about it. I didn't have the education about it that I have today, but I'm also, one of these people that doesn't discriminate. I mean, to me, my husband or husband to be, had many good characteristics, and being a Holocaust survivor was just part of him. It really didn't make any difference to me.
We enjoy doing what we
Yeah, we had a lot of interests in common. And really what was important to me, even though I admit I'm not a devoutly religious person, but it was important to me to marry someone who was also Jewish. And so, we had that in common. But, just like, today, to me, a human being is a human being. And if somebody's gay or trans or male or female, none of that matters to me. What matters to me is what type of person are you? So that's a long way around, but to answer your question, I wasn't surprised in a way, because there are lots of, at the time, still many Holocaust survivors in Israel, and it really didn't matter to me.
Okay, we have just one more question. Last chance, guys. Thank you again for your time, but we do have one more question, and then we'll let you go.
As an avid animal lover, and I know you mentioned your dog that you had early on in the village, when all this happened and the Jews were forced out of their homes, what happened to all the farms and the animals? Like, did they just get left behind, or what happened?
When you were forced when you were forced out of your home, first, when you moved from the village
to the city,
what happened to the animals? Well, you still own the property, so, but after you were forced to the ghetto, then what happened to your dog and other animals?
Well, that's a good question, because from the home, we were not allowed to take anything other than whatever you can carry with you in a small suitcase. So whatever we had was left behind. And what happened, God knows. I mean, I don't have the answers to what happened, because after liberation, when I came back, the dog or the cat that we had were not there.
Thank you so much.
All right, again, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And guys, just maybe one more round of applause.
And all the best to you, each and every one of you.
Okay. Wait. Bye.
So this is Margot Labrie. She'll be speaking to everyone about her life, but before that happens, there's a few things that I'd like to say. One is thank you to Jack Grossman for speaking with us. Some of you missed it, but he talked about his experience writing a book about somebody who was in the Holocaust. So we must say thank you so much to him. And Dr. Soharel, thank you to him for sharing his experience. That was very enlightening for all the students here. So thank you. We appreciate the Bagel Station for giving us food, breakfast, and lunch. And lastly, the North Carolina Council on Holocaust. Thank you to them for providing us with Anne Frank books and information pamphlets about the Holocaust. And one final thing, this whole day could not have happened if it weren't for Peter Thull. He was my grandfather, and he was someone that was very important to me. When he died, almost exactly a year ago, there was a donation that was set out where people could donate to the Peter Thull Holocaust Education Fund to make this day possible. So because of all the money that we were able to raise in the name of Peter Thull, I'd like to read a passage the rabbi wrote for his funeral because it means a lot to me. Peter Thull, what's in a name? Shakespeare asked. Indeed, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. In the case of Peter Thull, the very mentioning of his name reminds us of his goodness, caring, his love, his wisdom, inquisitiveness, and generosity. He was all those things, and to so many, but his Hebrew or Yiddish name says it all, which is Lazer, which is also short for Eliezer, which means God is my help or God helps. And when you think of all that Peter Thull was, he was a best friend to many, particularly in his family. He was altruistic, he was curious, knowledgeable, and capable of sharing knowledge. He was a natural storyteller. What happened in one of his last days. That is how Peter operated, always doing and thinking for others in the good of his heart. He was loving, he was a selfless man. Peter loved and thrived by interacting with people, no matter your age or place in the family, from his sons to his nieces and nephews and to his grandkids, from rolling around on the ground and hiding under beds, playing chess, singing with a guitar on the floor, or going clamming, all things that are very important to him. But he believed one was always a student of life, and he believed one can never stop learning. He vigilantly continued to explore and educate himself, and catalyzed others with hope of discussing anything. In his spirit, this fund in today's event was pulled together to memorialize and help prevent such an atrocity as the Holocaust from ever happening again. Never again can we stand by as injustice exists in this world. I will now introduce Margot Labrie.
I'm fine. I turned this on. Yeah. Thank you very much for introduction and the beautiful words that you spoke about your grandfather. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to tell you my story. As you know, my name is Margot Labrie. And of course, you know by now, you know that I'm a Holocaust survivor. And the story of my escape is based on the Kindertransport, which most of you have studied and heard about. Now, as we speak of the Holocaust, usually the first things that come to mind are concentration camps, death, killings, and many different forms of cruelties. In my case, I was never in a camp. I never had my head shaved. I do not have a number tattooed on my arm. I always had a roof over my head, some food to eat, and a bed to sleep in. And even so Holocaust related, my experience was different. After November 9th of 1938, Crystal Night, England immediately began to rescue 10,000 children from Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic. I was one of those children. The ages ranged from 3 months to 17 years. We traveled by train via Holland from different areas, and we eventually became known as the train children. Now I want you to take a moment and imagine as a young child coming home one day and being told that alone you're going to leave your family, your friends, and all your belongings, go to a foreign country with a foreign language, and live with strangers. That's basically what happened to me. I was 13 years old. Now, I knew that our life had become very difficult. It went from being very comfortable to being a struggle to exist. As children, we had friends one day, but they could not speak or play with us the next day. If they had, they would have even endangered their family, and that was strictly because we were Jewish. We had to change the schools that we attended and attend schools for Jewish students only. Now, I have to admit is that as a young child, I did not understand the severity of the situation until later in my life. My father had died early that year, and my mother tried to protect her 2 children as much as possible. The day after Crystal Night, her elderly parents were chased out of the village where they had lived all their lives and came to live with us. At that point, we were living in a very small apartment, and at that moment, my mother had to make some very quick decisions. My brother was old enough to immigrate to Israel, then Palestine, where he remained for the rest of his life. And since I was not old enough, my escape was England. Application was made. I was accepted. In April of 1939, my mother took me to the train station, where together with other children, we started our journeys to our new homes. Now, eventually, after a train, 2 train rides actually, and a ferry ride, we arrived at Liverpool Station in London. There where we met either by sponsors or members of Bloomsbury House, the committee that was responsible for those children who did not have sponsors. Those children were placed either in orphanages, on farms, or in hostels. I was picked up by a family who had sponsored me, which was lucky, saved my life, but not necessarily a good experience. I was reminded repeatedly that I was a refugee and I should be grateful to be where I was. I ate with the help in the kitchen and did some housework before and after school. I was cheap labor. Remember, I was still only 13 years old. Within a few months of the time I arrived in England, war broke out, September the 3rd of 1939, and the bombing started immediately. The family I lived with evacuated, leaving me and the help behind in London to face the bombing. Eventually, they told the committee that they could not afford to keep me any longer, and I was sent to a hostel outside of London, which was kind of an orphanage school for Jewish girls ranging from the age of 4 to 16. I lived there for 2 years. Rust Hall Beacon, as it was called, was not a bad place. Some of the staff were nice, others were not so nice, but we children had each other, the older ones looking after the younger ones, and life went on. At the age of 15, I was sent to a shop to clean and learn dressmaking. Now, after 2 years at the Beacon, one of the girls I had become very friendly with, we decided that we were old enough to venture out on our own. We requested and got permission to go and move back to London, where Julie had an aunt and uncle, and I'm sure that helped. First, we moved into another hostel, found jobs, managed to support ourselves. But after a couple of months of living there, we decided to move on. We rented a room from a lady who was kind enough. She told the committee she would give us meals, but she didn't. Because really the committee felt that we really were not old enough to be totally on our own. Now, Julie and I lived in that room for a few months and then rented a small apartment where we lived until I left for the United States in April of 1944. In April of 1944, there was a war going on. And in those days, to cross the Atlantic, we traveled in a convoy. Now, a convoy is a group of ships accompanied by support ships, like U-boats or merchant ships not carrying goods. They serve to rescue the lives in case the larger ships carrying soldiers or seamen are attacked. It took 2 weeks to get from Liverpool to Boston. And during that time, we encountered a tremendous storm on the Atlantic. That was my first experience of cruising. It was rough. In those days, ships did not have stabilizers, and those ships rolled. Life in England during the war was not easy. We barely made ends meet, but we never worried that others might have more than we did. We went to dances, we met boys, mostly soldiers. We were teenagers and managed to enjoy ourselves. We wore the same clothes most of the time because we could not afford new ones. But then, with the war going on, no one we knew had any more. Besides, everything was rationed. Now later, as I thought about my experience in England, being that I was there because of the Holocaust, I realized how much I had been deprived of. I was deprived of the loving attention of family. I was deprived of a good education and growing up under normal circumstances. I was deprived of who I am and how to be an adult in a safe environment. I had to figure out what was right or wrong, because if I did wrong, there was no one to help me. For the 5 years that I was in England, I was totally responsible for myself. I was deprived of a childhood. Now, once I was married and I saw my friends with their parents enjoying an adult friendship, not a child-parent relationship, I realized I was also denied that. I only understood the trauma and the tragedy of my entire experience as an adult. After reading a book called Exodus by Leon Uris, the part where Karen's father is saying goodbye to her at the train station as she's leaving for Denmark, at that time I had a child, and I asked myself, if I had to, could I or would I give up my child? And at that moment I could understand what my mother must have gone through, sending both of her children away within 6 weeks of each other to make sure that they would be safe and their lives would be spared. Also knowing that she may never see either one of them again. Her love for us and her strength is indescribable. Now, realizing what she too was denied, not seeing her children as grown-up, responsible adults, as well as being a grandmother. And my children would never experience that special love of a grandmother. Understanding it made me very angry. We could communicate with her for a while, but that ended up in 1941. When the opportunities arose for me to go back to Frankfurt, the city where I was born, I said never. I wasn't wanted there before. Why would I want to go back there now? Well, never is a long time. And as I aged and mellowed, I began to see things differently. In 1996, I was invited as a former citizen to visit Frankfurt as their guest. But I would only go if my brother from Israel could join me. By now, I also wanted my husband to see where I was born. And we invited our oldest son to join us, giving him a chance to see that his mother came from somewhere. Now, I was pleasantly surprised at that moment when we stepped off the plane. It was obvious that we were dealing with a different generation. A generation that was not denying what their parents had allowed to happen, but a generation that was remorseful and wanted us to know that it would never be allowed to happen again. I'm not saying that there was no anti-Semitism. Then, yes, there was. And there's more of it even now. And in the light of what is happening in this country lately, with shootings, hate crimes, racism, it's all around us. We have it here. To a point where I'm asking myself, will I again have to look over my shoulder and watch what I'm saying for fear that I might be arrested because I'm a Jew? Will my children, grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren see our synagogues burn the way I did? Will occupational opportunities be denied to them because of their religion, color of their skin, or their sexual orientation? Anyway, My brother and I walked our early childhood. We visited every apartment we had lived in, every school we attended. We spoke in several of the high schools, and were always treated with the greatest respect and courtesy. The trip taught me something. Holding on to anger and grudges is a waste of energy. It is not productive, it is destructive. Anger at anything or anyone, parents, siblings, children, friends. When it's over, let it go. And I'm glad I did and went forward with my life, because I also know that that's what my mother would have wanted me to do. Eventually, with the love and encouragement of my late husband, I caught up with my high school education and my college education. My chosen profession as a travel counselor has given me the opportunity to see most of the world. I enjoyed 55 and a half years of a happy marriage. I'm the proud mother of 2 fabulous sons, 2 daughter-in-laws, enjoy grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Now, having given you my experience, having survived the Holocaust, allow me to go back and give you the background of what happened to set my story and many others in motion. In the fall of 1938, numerous laws were passed in Germany restricting Jewish economic activities and occupational opportunities. And as of January of 1939, all Jews had to carry identification cards. On October the 28th of 1938, 17,000 Jews of Polish citizenship, many who had been living in Germany for decades, were arrested and relocated across the Polish border. The Polish government refused to admit them and interned them into relocation camps. Among them was a family who had lived in the city of Hanover since 1911. On October the 27th, their belongings were confiscated, and they were forced to move across the Polish border. Their 17-year-old son, who was at that time living with an uncle in Paris, when he heard of his parents' expulsion, became so angry that he decided he was going to go to the German embassy and kill the German ambassador. Upon discovering when he got there that the ambassador was not in, he shot and severely wounded Secretary Ernst Fromrath, who died of his wounds 2 days later, November 9th, 1938. The revenge of that murder launched the pogrom against the German Jews, and since it was interpreted that it was an act against Hitler himself, the rampaging also carried on through the newly acquired territories such as Austria and the Czech Republic. The night of November the 9th became known as Crystal Night, Kristallnacht, or the night of the broken glass. The day after Crystal Night, we saw our synagogues burn, Nazis coming to the house looking for men to arrest them for no other reason than the fact that they were Jewish. After that night, England stepped in, starting the Kindertransport. Now, not to be misleading, the Kindertransport was not the only way that Jews could escape out of Europe. There were stories of the righteous Christians who actually put their lives on the lines for hiding or transporting Jews. There was Shanghai, China. There was no quota, and about 20,000 Jews immigrated to Shanghai. There were affidavits of sponsors. They required visas. And although many Jews got out that way, the lines at the consulates were long, and many never made it to the front. Italy, in spite of Mussolini, protected the Jews for a long time, as did Greece. And the Japanese ambassador in Lithuania issued visas, disobeying his country. Schindler hired Jews in his factories, and Leica camera from 1933 until 1939 established the Leica Freedom Train, allowing Jews to leave Germany under the guise of being employees of the company and were being transferred overseas. Land was donated in Argentina, outside of Buenos Aires, for Jews to come if they agreed to farm the land. And of course, Sir Nicholas Winton, the English gentleman who alone rescued 669 children from the Czech Republic, which became known as the Czech Kindertransport. And in conclusion, going back to my story, my late brother and I never saw our mother again. We only found out in recent years that she was deported to Itzbika, a ghetto in Poland, on May the 24th of 1948. Itzbika had a railway station, and deportees who did not go on to Auschwitz were taken off the train, kept there, and in October of 1948, most of them were lined up and shot and buried in mass graves. As to my late brother, we parted as children and met again 25 years later when we were both parents. We had since 1963 been very fortunate to see each other frequently, and we treasured the times we spent together. In June of 2019, my children and 3 of my brother's grandchildren went back to Frankfurt for a stone-setting ceremony. Germany is setting stones for victims of the Holocaust. These stones are set into the sidewalk of the last registered address where the victims lived. The stones were engraved with the name, date of birth, and where they either died or immigrated to. The stones were brass colored. In my case, they set 3 stones, one for my mother, one for my brother, and one for me. We continued the trip to go to Berlin, visiting all the Holocaust memorials, museums, and a concentration camp outside of Berlin. Now the trip, although very emotional and exhausting, gave me the sense of closure, that at least Germany recognized that my mother was killed by Nazis. But with it all, let me end by saying, life has been good. I'm here to tell the story of a time that is already history, but a time that must never be allowed to happen again. Yes, my experience may already be history, but what I see today, what is going on in the Ukraine, brings back many memories. Seeing families saying goodbye to each other, possibly never to see each other again, parents sending children away by themselves to make sure that they are safe. It again proves what a vicious leader with possibly a disturbed mind can do to innocent people. How vigilant we must be, always, to protect ourselves from such leaders and to protect our freedom. I thank you. If there are questions, I will do my best to answer them.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Here, Wyatt.
I remember you said something about people who were shot in 1948, but
42.
40.
40.
Oh, that makes more sense because
42. I'm sorry if I said 48.
in a
that
mass
was
grave.
wrong.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. I guess I don't have a question anymore.
How did your brother's experience differ than yours with his immigration? How did your brother's experience differ from yours with his immigration out of the country?
How did we
Your brother's immigration, how did that go for him?
I'm sorry.
When your brother immigrated, what was his life like initially?
Oh, my brother went to Israel and became what is called a kibbutznik, which is a community that really, most of the kibbutzim in Israel were built around the edges, the borders, in order to protect from invasions or the enemies. And they built, it was very socialistic. It was one for all and all for one. And what one had, the other had. If one got a pair of shoes, the other got a pair of shoes. They were extremely poor. I mean, they're very, very primitive. And but over the years, they worked and became very successful. And although there are still kibbutzim in existence in Israel, but today they are very capitalistic, not socialistic anymore. They've become very successful, very very service-like and education-oriented, and they've done very well.
Hi. Have you found that sharing your story over the years has helped you kind of be able to reconcile with the trauma that you had to experience as a young girl?
I suppose in a way it does. I suppose it forces me to remember, but it also forces me to accept and recognize. And most of it all forces me to be grateful and appreciate the fact that I'm here to tell the story.
So as a parent, you're having to miss so much of your childhood and missing that family structure. So much of what I do for my own kids is the traditions that my mom did for me, and even to the notes and lunch boxes and things like that. Like when you were parenting your own children, where did you draw from to create that for them?
Instinct. I don't know. You know, I had never been around infants. I didn't know how to diaper a baby when I had my own. So I was really strictly instinct. I mean, you know, I don't know. I mean, I learned, I didn't have the opportunity to have my mother tell me how to do it and what to do and how to cook or how to be a wife or be a mother. But I learned a lot from friends. I made friends and I just watched and learned from them. I don't know. I had one very close friend, and I think she told me how to be a mother. But they grew up in spite of me.
I'm sure you did wonderful.
I think so.
I know with your experiences, I know some people come after going through something like this have PTSD or mental mind blocks where everything happened and everything they've experienced. For you, how would you say this shaped you for the worst and for the better? For how it shaped you as a person you are today?
Well, it made me grow up very quickly. And I think it gave me a sense of appreciation of the many blessings that I have today, the things that I'm grateful for, and just to be here. It just made the world, made life more beautiful to be able to say, here I am. And in spite of Hitler, who tried to destroy us, I'm here. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, I have my brother's family is still in Israel, and there are 28 of them today. He had 3 children. He lost his son in the Six-Day War, but these 2 daughters, who each had 3 children, and each child had another 3 children, and there are 28 of them today, 29th on the way. And I have my own family here, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So how blessed I am that here was somebody who destroyed us, but look what we've come out as. I think that's what made me the person I am.
I have a question. You talked about your friend Julie. It's kind of 2 parts. When you first moved out together, what kind of jobs were you able to find? And then also, as you grew up and became an adult, did you stay in contact with Julie? And where's she today?
Julie and I were the closest of friends for all our lives. She passed away about 3 years ago. She lived in New York, and we spent a lot of time together, even going back and forth. They came to California. We spent vacations together. Julie and I talked to each other almost every day. We were the closest of friends all our lives. Julie did some secretarial work, and I worked in a factory where they were making, I think, skirts and blouses or something, and learned how to make buttonholes on a sewing machine. But we just managed to, support ourselves. I mean, and after I left, as a matter of fact, Julie joined the army and became an interpreter and was sent to Germany as an interpreter. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Was your husband American or?
My husband was born and raised in San Francisco. Now, the next question is usually, how did you meet him? I'll tell you very quickly. I had an uncle in San Francisco. In fact, I had 2 uncles there who came to visit his mother. And he said, I have this little niece in England, and I have to write to her. And this young man, who was in his late teens at the time, said, give me her name and address, and I'll write to her. And that started a pen palship. 8.5 years. And when I came to the United States in 1944, he was in the Navy, and then it was patriotic to write to a sailor. And in 1948, my uncles invited me to come to San Francisco, and this young man picked me up at the airport. And San Francisco had a beautiful skyline, just gorgeous day. And I came from black city, New York, and bombed out London. And I always say I don't know whether I fell in love with the skyline or the guy who was driving the car. But 48 hours later, he proposed, and I said yes, and never looked back. Never had a date with a guy. I stayed for 3 weeks, and 7 weeks later to the day, came back on a Saturday afternoon, and Sunday morning, the two of us got in the car and drove to Reno and got married. We didn't elope, everybody knew, it was no secret. Our wedding cost $35. So I always say, it's not the cost of the marriage that makes the cost of the wedding that makes the marriage. And don't underestimate the power of the pen, because it works. 8.5 years, it's great.
Anyone else? Well, I thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. And I hope you all have a wonderful summer, which is getting close. You're getting close to the end of the school year, and I wish you all the best of luck. And stay well, and stay positive.
Margot is willing to do some pictures if you're interested. Also, students who came in just for this part of today's event, there's an exhibit about the Kindertransport back here. Also, be on the lookout for these QR codes. The bottom one says Margot Labrie, and we would love for you to scan the QR code and give us some thoughts about your experiences today with this presentation.
They turn this off now.